and whatever I see is smiling at me. Love is who I am. So hello there and welcome to this winter edition video today with me. It's a December solstice actually today, and we've hit the pivot point, as we may call it. There's two major pivot points on Earth. One is the June solstice and the second one is the December solstice, and it really depends where you are in terms of the hemisphere and the planet. So as you can see, I'm here in the northern hemisphere and it's really cold and it's snowy and it's icy and it's a true winter wonderland. And in truth, for me, it wasn't really such a wonderland because to be honest, and I do like to share everything honestly, December was a very challenging month for me. In truth, I had to deal with a lot of physical things that really are the root of our third dimension and us being here. And to be honest, before I start with today's topic, I want to share with those of you who perhaps were going through the same in terms of our earthly embodiment. A lot of you may have felt this need to compromise certain things or values or beliefs in order to just be and feel, that your life here has a certain value, that you are here on earth as well, just as you are celestial. And recently I've listened to this interview with one of my favorite authors, actually, Patricia Corey, who has awesome books on Syrian revelations. And I just discovered she has a new book, which of course I ordered right away, although I don't read much, but I was really excited. And during the interview, she shared some aspects of us adapting to the third dimension, even though we hold higher consciousness, and how certain things really we have to compromise with in terms of, perhaps you're a hater of technology and you know that it leads the majority of the population into this robotic state and artificial intelligence, but you also use it, but you kind of use it in balance so that, it kind of comes out something of higher value, which is what I do in my videos as well. I couldn't come across the way I do if I didn't use technology as well. Or, I really don't use a phone for calls. I just use it to post my videos and photos on Instagram and so on. So there is this earthly maturity and this ripening of ourselves in terms of grounding our presence. And I have to share that I really am a free spirit, and I don't like to get myself too much entangled in the earthly ways or third dimensional modality, which is matter. Although I don't judge matter, I just really want to be free from any sort of being bound here, through certain contracts and things. And I really am avoiding such things. But I've shared with you recently, I had this experience with losing my car, and kind of like through the unfortunate events, needing to find a substitute. And it was a really poor substitute, and I had quite a few challenges with it. And I was like, when did human life become less valuable than, things we put, labels we put on the material goods and so on and so forth. So there's lots of deep psychological issues that we came here to clear. But we can't do certain things if we're not also a part of the structures that, bind us to physical reality, because this is where we came to do our work. So whenever I am in the mash of those things, in the midst of those things, these errands, and they kind of feel like they're draining my life force, and feels like, I would just rather escape it all. I don't want to deal with it. I just want to be here in nature, because that's what I am. That's what my essence is. And at those times, that program gets triggered, and the program is, I don't have time for this. Ished, you know what I mean? Spelled backwards. Like, I really don't have time for this. I need to do my purpose, because that's why I'm really here. And if you find yourself sometimes, complaining about similar things, you will notice that even that is a part of our purpose just as well. And that's the lesson I get whenever I say, well, I don't want to do this, it's not a part of me being here. And it is, because we also sometimes need to make the kind of wise decisions to navigate through the earthly reality, so we can anchor a light here, and not wanting to be present here, even if it's something to do with, kind of like, the values you have. And my values are, I really don't like anything that goes against nature, which is also, cars and their waste gases. And for me to have my freedom to visit my vortex spots, to go to the mountains, I can't exist at this time without being mobile. And certain days I just like go, I don't want to even have a car. It's too expensive. I don't make a lot of money, as you know, doing selfless service work. It's very risky. You don't know when you're going to get payments or donations, or it's on and off. You're like always a little bit, on that edge. And the thing is that whenever this pattern is triggered, it's actually a deeper calling to embrace whatever is put here and whatever exists as a part of the collective energy here as well, because we can either avoid it and say it's bad or it's evil, because there are certain things that are evil. They do go against nature, but for us to exist in this world, we can't change it within a day. So that means we can't just go and live in a cave, because the whole system, we say, is wrong. From the higher perspective, how things can be, because volunteer souls, we came here from worlds or lumen realms, in my case, that there's just pure harmony. For me, I have to let you know what I recently was sharing, when I had this feeling inside of me that in wintertime, when you have to be more indoors, because you can see how it is, it's pretty frozen, it's like I have to take all that perfection that exists outside in nature, and I have to put this limitless, infinite amount of purity and raw beauty, and I have to take it in this tiny quadrant space that exists in this tiny apartment. And sometimes that makes me go, that suppressed feminine Lilith kind of energy. You go like, oh, and we do have that. If you're a feeling being, you will have that. There's an eruption of things we need to express here. And how we heal Earth is expressing these feelings. So as volunteer souls, we sometimes need to go into these situations, because avoiding them makes us stay somewhere hovering above the plane of reality and saying, well, that's lesser than what we know as harmony and perfection. But when we go in these situations, if you've noticed yourself, we really break free. And there's something that just, we break free through the dark, through the systems, sometimes, systems of corruption, sometimes things we say, well, that goes against nature, but you're still existing in this world. You came here to help in physical form. You had to descend your energy body here. For a lot of us, we existed in light bodies, and we needed to come here in the physical body, which in times is like, I need a car to go somewhere. That's old. That's outdated. That's really ancient. It's also a part of what brings a contribution of healing just as well. So in my case, I had to accept certain things that I really don't value. It's not within my highest value, but I also knew that for me to exist in a certain comfortable style that I can feel good as a human, I also need to make this balanced choice. And I got a lot of messages about wise decisions. So now, as you know, Saturn went into Capricorn, and now everyone's talking about it. It's just in alignment with our solstice, and it was this beautiful new moon in Sagittarius that happened right at the galactic center degree, which, every year the sun goes and around the whole year, and at the end of the year it makes that connection with 26 to 27 degrees of Sagittarius. But then the moon that was new was also in that position. But what was beautiful was like the whole week was nothing but alignment. And I felt, well, there's these beautiful alignments. I have to deal with these things, And sometimes that's the part of the alignments. We don't always see the bigger picture, because we sometimes want to break free from not doing anything at all, from just really wanting to avoid it all. We don't want to be a part of the system. But in certain cases, we've had agreements to be, because we have to exist. We have to, whenever you participate in something, whether it's getting a contract, buying a house, buying a car, something like that's very physical, you bring your life force there, you bring your love there. And when we do something with resistance, love cannot flow through, as you know. That's the basic law of life force. So when we find ourselves in situations that a part of us still judges as less than or evil, or, goes against the nature, and I'll share more in my newest video that I'm preparing for a while. I wanted to share it sooner, but I couldn't, because, as you know, my life was terrible in December. Not terrible, but it was challenging. So what's happening is that every time we embrace more of what is the current framework of Earth and the density of the structure that of course is dissolving, but how we contribute to this dissolution is by embracing little bit by little bit, and just breathing into it and saying it's okay, I don't know, to have this car, or it's okay to have this house, although the pathway towards it was not instant manifestation, when things just drop as, rainbows from the sky, which come and manifest as something glittery and sparkly, like in the crystalline realms. It's different here. We have to understand the natural laws, the way they respond through the different dynamics, through the different systems. So when people are sharing now so much about this Saturn moving into Capricorn, you have to know, everyone's asking themselves the basic question, well, how will this affect me in my life? And, my focus as a pioneer, as an Ascension guide, is to focus on the whole, not just individuals alone. Because, again, remember that each individual experience their uniqueness, their own reality through what they have evolved into as a soul. So in a way, for me, how Spirit showed me is that Saturn moves into its natural position because Capricorn is the sign that it rules. It's in a way a sign of maturity, of coming of age, of graduating in a way, but for those souls who are not afraid to embrace the realm of creation, because Capricorn is an earthly sign. In many cases, in many cultures, it is represented as, that mountain goat that just keeps on climbing. And it's very, in a way, when you see a Capricorn, in truth, when you see a mountain goat, and I see a lot when I go in the mountains, you see how they are really, for them to survive at such an elevated point, they're very earthy. So they have to be very rooted. They're connected with the stone element, with the rocks. So without that symbiotic relationship, they couldn't really survive the way they do. So you see, for you to bring that high energy, sometimes you have to, meld your presence with it. And we don't always relate that with what we would, through our, perception, call that, wow, that's love. Because in many cases, a lot of you remember love that's Neptunian, that's so pure and just astral, how you would call it, or ethereal, pardon me. And it feels so elevated. And a lot of times that's what I experience, but it's not always so simple to love that which is dense and it's so raw. So I will talk more in the upcoming video about this embodiment of the goddess, because the goddess represents the element of nature, of pure life force that moves through the elements, through the elemental kingdoms, through things that superimpose the structure that we use day to day. You might think you just wake up and get yourself in order and do your things. But there's a whole structure of physicality that makes that possible through the constant sustenance of elements, as you know. And there's just pure alchemy. So whatever it is, it comes alive with our love. Even if you've ever driven a car, and if you've looked at it as just a vehicle, or if you gave it consciousness, it started acting that way. You started to infuse or embed a part of you into that car. But for you to do that, you had to perceive everything as having an allowance for life, having a possibility or potential for life. If you see everything as lifeless, then you will never see the potential that it can develop through. It's the same with our planet. People see it as just this flat rock. They used to, though. Now they see it as a spinning rock that's more like a sphere, but it's still just a rocky planet. And it has no life force, and it's just something that provides our sustenance, which we continue to, abuse and over-abuse and create a lot of entropy with it. So the more you elevate your consciousness, the more you are able to bring that forth in the earthly systems. And a lot of you brave ones, courageous ones, you're going to go into the systems, and I've shared that with you before, in a way that somehow, you agreed upon. And whatever it is, we have to embrace that we've agreed upon those things. Sometimes when we will progress in our spirituality, in this path of embodiment, we won't always see it as progression, because the mind has an idea what spirituality is, and it's very mental based. But goddess, that pure life force, the nature, creation-based spirituality embraces both vertical and horizontal as one, which means that the light of oneness, that which is the constant evolution, it also flows through that which is the infinite void, that womb of creativity, the divine goddess element, which makes life possible. It's the nesting force for life to evolve. So for you as a physical being to have a certain comfort in your living reality, so you don't exist as cavemen did. At a certain framework, you have to embrace a part of that framework. But within that framework, you're changing the structure of that. What you say, well, it's not the best. We say, well, we have cars now. perhaps they're a little better than the old cars, which really had terrible waste gases and so, and they're perhaps making them a little better now, but it's still not our optimum. But when you go into that, instead of denying the technology or whatever it is provided for now, even if we say, well, there's massive elite systems that are blocking the usage of electric cars or things of higher nature, higher systems and means of propulsion, which exist already. It's just that they're not available because of the certain resistance to it, right? So love can't flow through them, so they can become available in mass in the collective consciousness. So when you go into the nature of accepting what is now, but then infusing your life force to what it can evolve into, then you're truly living the path of rightful evolution, which doesn't judge and say the old is bad, but it says, okay, the old might be outdated, but it's still a framework which life will evolve through. And I'm helping this evolution and this evolutionary process through love instead of resistance and judging. And I am the judge of what's evil and what's not. So I'm being shown that certain things for us to do in this modern world, in certain times and structures, it feels like it's modern. In certain ways, it doesn't. It feels like it's deeply primitive. For those of you who've come from higher evolved civilizations, probably elsewhere, not here, it's kind of like that idea that this is very... as you know, it's kind of like outworn and it's very primitive in certain cases even. So that was the main message. But I also want to share something that's really important for those of you who perhaps have noticed this. But first, let me say that when you consider or you contemplate on this change and you say Saturn, the planet of karma, and now it moves into Capricorn, what will it mean for me? But ask yourself also, well, how does this breathe into the creation, because these are cycles that exist, cycles of creation. How does this affect the whole and the collective? Because eventually we're still a collective. You don't go out and then you're like, I'm out. Well, you belong to a greater group of beings, even if you believe yourself to be of elsewhere or somewhere else or another group of beings. Well, that group of beings is a group cluster within many clusters that are part of one giant super cluster. So in a way, this consciousness, each man to its own, and just me and my family, it's really primitive as well. We don't evolve to a higher degree by embracing that alone and saying, well, I'm taken care of, period, and that's it. So it's really important to ask yourself, well, how does this affect this coming into its own position? How does this affect us as humans as well? And in many cases, like I said, those of you who've really progressed in your spirituality, not just inwardly, but also embracing creation and helping with the infusion of your life force and your own conscious contribution, embracing more and more of galactic consciousness, you will see how you will get greater overseeing abilities, but also greater responsibilities. Because remember, each ability brings a greater responsibility. And sometimes we ask for things we're not yet capable of maintaining. Okay, so we're not here to control things, but we're not going to be given things or knowledge if we're not ready for it. So when people say, well, I get this knowledge or this, a lot of times it's just the ideas that their mind is playing with them, and it's mental and it's based on outdated beliefs that perhaps they have already been implementing through many lifetimes, but it's not something new that comes directly from spirit. So it's like you're juggling with the ideas that you're just kind of tossing and turning around, but they're not new ideas. They're just recycled old ideas. And a lot of times people mistaken that for this genius new, which is the life force that brings you that which is aligned with our now, not that which perhaps is familiar to you, maybe from another lifetime or another timeline. And that is why I always imply unity consciousness, which is the synthesis of that and coming through the now, that which is the living highest potential, because life force always functions through implementing the highest potential and growing and evolving through that highest potential. But we have to be developed in that term. So a lot of people ask, and say, well, Capricorn stands for wisdom, so I'm going to get wiser this year. Well, not if you're not going to make wise decisions, not if you're not going to understand what soul integrity is, not if you're not really going to work on yourself, not just inwardly and, just meditate, but also see how that meditation has to flow through your daily life. through every choice you make, through how you respond to others, how you connect and communicate with others, what your actions are like, because that's what truly determines our growth and maturity. So on the other hand, what I wanted to share today is, it's basically a question, and I wanted to ask you if you have noticed yourself that time is different now. Time, not just how we perceive it, because when you change your awareness through higher consciousness, infusion, you'll start to notice changes in your environment, but also in terms of perceiving time through relative expression. But also that which is, I'm going to talk more about that in the next coming time, especially in the next year. But time is perceived now more galactically because, as you know, Earth is joining and it's coming into this photon belt that aligns it with the cycles that haven't been implemented quite for a while. And the spin, as you know, the rotation, because time is measured differently in each dimensional space, which means time, when we start to change vibrationally and therefore dimensionally, will start to be measured or perceived differently. So if you've noticed now, time is not what it used to be. And even in that interview I've watched, they've talked about time being every day. It's like, where did the time go? How did the time pass? Okay, but I'm not just talking about that. Time within your vortex space, within your perception and reality, you have a different relationship with it, because time is, it's not just spherical, it's like cycles. There's a cycle of creation, moves out into the worlds of creation, and it kind of spins out and it plays its story, and in each dimensional space it will be expressed differently and felt differently as well. But what I've noticed is we started noticing those changes this year. I think it was in the beginning of November, because we, as you know, we have these alpine peaks, and the sun, the trajectory of the sun can be observed there through the peaks. It's almost like the ancient method, when they had stone circles and these ancient sites, and that's how they measured and that's how they saw time. So they knew, and that's how they measured it. How we measure time now is through calendars, and every year is like this day, that day, this is the hour it happens, this is when that happens. But this eventually will have to go out of our mainstream, because we're not going to be in the same vibrational space as the whole planet, not just as individuals. Because, the sun is ascending, it's moving its trajectory as is aligning with the galactic center. And then, of course, the planets in the solar system, as well as our Earth, are ascending. So it's a slow moderation, and if you're very sensitive, you're going to notice it sooner. But what we've noticed is that even in November, the sun was going down. We were like, isn't it sooner than last year? The sun goes down. It was really weird. We said, okay, never mind. And what happened was, just a few days before solstice, what we noticed is the sun stayed, it didn't go behind the main mountain top. Solstice is the lowest point. Okay, let me explain it like this. Solstice is the lowest point, okay? And solstice is usually indicative of the time when the fastest sun goes down, right? So you don't see it, I don't know, let's say it was already before 2 o'clock. But what we noticed, even before solstice even occurred, the lengthening of that already started to occur. So the sun was already staying up a little longer. Like, wait a minute, wasn't it a few days ago? Wasn't it going, sooner? What's happening now? It's not solstice yet. So I've asked a few people, and some of them had the experience of feeling into that as well. It's probably very apparent for those of you who have some kind of indication. It's very subtle. It's subtle changes, but you notice them, and we've noticed it, and we went like, wait a minute, it doesn't align with the calendar and saying, well, today's solstice. It's the lowest point. So it really implies that time is changing, because the whole vibrational structure is changing. So we're going to notice that throughout the years, I feel more and more. And it's going to be time for us to create new models of measuring time. And our old, outdated Gregorian calendars will not play the same role anymore. Probably in a few years now, it's going to start changing. But you who are carriers of galactic consciousness, and if you have no idea, if you want to be more evolved in that regard, because it means knowledge brings power and brings responsibility, because you're holding light from that space of awareness. So you can take my Galactic Human Embodiment course or Life Force Mastery course called the Tantrika, because these help you to elevate your higher consciousness state. So you can contribute to this and hold and maintain that energy so that it becomes embedded within the collective, so that people start waking up to what is galactic time, what are cycles of time, because time was presented to us through the Mayans many centuries ago, and it started coming out now before the 2012 alignment. But many things that are going to happen astrologically, especially during 2018 and 2020, are going to be even more important than that timeline, which all timelines are connected. What was in 2012 will now be really implied in the movement we're going through now in the next 2 to 3 years. And I feel also Saturn in Capricorn is going to have a huge role to play because it came in its natural position. So there's certain lockings, when you lock in energy, that are happening. So observe, really be observant, try to notice changes. And you do that when you connect and commune with nature more. We're not just artificially following, what people tell you, what ideas are being spread around the collective. But when you move into your heart and you are one with nature and you commune with the element of creation, which is the goddess or the divine mother, whatever you call it, life force, supreme Holy Spirit life force, doesn't matter. It's that which brings life to all creation. So it animates structures that can be carriers of spirit, that, it descends more and more into form. So I'm going to talk more about that in the next video topic, the next free course. But if you want to support my work, because, these are challenging times for those of us who do and work selflessly, because we do everything like this, and we don't have regular salaries or paychecks. So people sometimes think it's easy for us. And I just recently heard an astrologer, he was saying, well, those of you who are Capricorns are really aware of this. And I have my first house moon Capricorn. And I know how this feels because my third of my being is a Capricorn. And she said, you're so strong and vigilant, but you also have this need to be supported and for people to assist you. But a lot of times people say, well, Caps, they're good. They have it well made because they appear to be so strong on the outside, and people forget to reciprocate, and people think, well, they can handle it. And she said, it's not fair to you guys because you're just so hardworking. And I was like crying when I listened to that because I felt it's true. I was really moved by what she was sharing. And yeah, sometimes a lot of this agile energy of Capricorn is misinterpreted for self-sufficiency. But let me remind you, no person is an island. No one is completely self-sufficient. We are self-reliant. That's the core of where we need to come from, of our own life force infusion. But there is an infusion that connects, and that's the alchemy. That doesn't exist with just one element. Elements then connect and sync together. They lock in together in that syncing position. So if you ever want to support my work, my channel, you can either donate or buy my courses or whatever. So thank you. And I hope you're going to have a beautiful holiday time. I wish to share that video as well soon because I have some things in mind, but time just didn't provide me because I have too many issues, challenges that are of physical nature. So I hope that in January this will ignite and we're going to move into first gear again. So I'm going to see you soon. Have a happy solstice, beautiful holiday time, and I'll talk to you again very soon. So much love. Bye. Magical.